Stop sending executive emails about systems you don't understand. They ignored the maintenance worker in their own tower. The CEO brushed past him for months, dismissing his warnings like background noise in her empire of glass and steel. He never argued, never raised his voice, just kept watching. Then her daughter whispered his name, and everything changed. Because this was never about a job title. Before I show you the exact moment when the executive lockdown trapped her child above the 40th floor with no override access. By the way, where are you watching from? Tell me in the comments below. This isn't a story about power. It's about who truly has it. The corridor still smelled faintly of lemon disinfectant and polished marble when Daniel Mercer lowered his gaze and stepped aside. The COO's shoes clicked sharply against the floor, expensive leather striking stone with impatient rhythm. Through the glass walls, assistants pretended not to stare. Daniel adjusted the strap of his tool bag. Oil-darkened gloves peeked from his back pocket. His uniform bore the company logo over his heart, slightly frayed at the stitching. He nodded once, calm, almost deferential. "I wasn't sending emails," he said quietly. "I filed a maintenance anomaly report." The CEO didn't slow down. Vivienne Harrow moved like the building belonged to her bloodstream. Tailored navy suit, diamond studs catching the chandelier light. She didn't look at him when she replied. "That system was installed by people far more qualified than facilities staff," she said. "Focus on what you're hired to do. Focus on what you're hired to do." Daniel absorbed the words without flinching. Behind the glass fade, the city shimmered in a late afternoon haze. 40 stories below, traffic pulsed like a living circuit board. He had learned long ago that pride wasted oxygen. Down in the service corridor, the air shifted. Cooler, humming with machinery. He crouched beside a panel most executives didn't know existed. His fingers traced the seam, feeling vibration patterns through steel. The rhythm was wrong. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just slightly misaligned, like a drumbeat off by half a second. He opened his tablet and reviewed the building's automated security logs. Timestamps flickered. Micro delays. Unauthorized handshake attempts that disappeared before alerts triggered. Subtle. Too subtle. Upstairs, laughter echoed from the executive lounge. Investors were arriving next week for the live demonstration of the company's new integrated security platform, an artificial intelligence grid designed to control elevators, biometric locks, surveillance, and emergency systems in seamless unity. Daniel closed the panel gently. He'd seen seamless systems before. He'd also seen how they failed. His phone vibrated. A photo lit the screen, his 6-year-old son Eli, missing his front tooth, grinning under a paper crown from a school play. Asthma inhaler visible on the kitchen table behind him. Daniel exhaled slowly. Probation review in 2 weeks. One more complaint about overstepping, and the health coverage vanished with the paycheck. He climbed the service stairs, boots echoing in the narrow concrete well. On the 32nd floor, he paused as the executive elevator doors slid open. Inside stood Vivienne Harrow. And beside her, clutching a tablet nearly as large as her torso, was Lily. The girl's eyes brightened when she saw him. "Mom, that's him," she whispered. Vivienne barely glanced over. "That's maintenance, sweetheart." He fixed the flicker in the lobby lights, Lily insisted. "And he said the building talks if you listen." Daniel felt heat rise faintly in his chest, not embarrassment, something else. Vivienne's lips pressed thin. "Buildings don't talk. They vibrate," Daniel said gently. "Sometimes that's enough." The elevator doors remained open a beat too long. An assistant cleared her throat from behind them. Vivienne finally met his eyes, cool, appraising. Mr. Mercer, isn't it? I've been informed you've raised concerns about infrastructure integrity. Yes, ma'am, and I've been informed those concerns are unfounded. He nodded once. With respect, the delays are patterned. Her expression hardened. Pattern recognition is handled by the AI system, not facilities. Lily looked between them, confused. Daniel stepped back. Understood. The doors closed. Inside the elevator, Lily tugged at her mother's sleeve. He's not wrong. Vivian exhaled sharply. Sweetheart, you can't trust everyone who sounds confident, but even as she spoke, something unsettled flickered behind her composed exterior. Down the corridor, Daniel stood alone, listening to the faint hum in the walls. He didn't need validation, he needed time. He returned to the operations console, tucked behind a locked maintenance door, and overlaid the vibration logs with elevator synchronization data. The anomaly sharpened, small, deliberate latency spikes routed through a rarely accessed service node. Not random. Testing. He saved the report again, not to executives this time, to himself. Above him, glass reflected sunset in molten gold. In the executive wing, caterers wheeled in champagne carts for the investor rehearsal dinner. Laughter carried through marble halls. No one noticed the man in steel-toed boots mapping the nervous system beneath their feet. Power never looked down. Daniel wiped his hands on a cloth worn soft from years of use. His pulse remained steady. Years ago, in another uniform, in another country, he'd stood in rooms where failure meant more than embarrassment. This building wasn't different. It just didn't know it yet. And as night settled over the city and the tower lights shimmered like a beacon of untouchable success, the quiet single father listened to the structure breathe, and heard the warning no one else could. The vibration shifted again beneath his palm, not louder, just closer. Daniel straightened slowly in the maintenance alcove, the fluorescent light above him buzzing in uneven rhythm. The building's internal dashboard scrolled across his tablet, lines of code flickering like restless thoughts. Someone, or something, was mapping the grid from inside. Upstairs, elevator cables whispered through their shafts. He closed the panel and headed toward the lobby, boots soft against polished stone. The evening crowd had thinned. Security guards leaned back in ergonomic chairs, monitors reflecting blue against their faces. Near the wide glass windows overlooking the city, Lily sat cross-legged on the marble floor. She wasn't supposed to be there. "Your mom still in meetings?" he asked gently. She nodded without looking up. Investor rehearsal dinner. Her tablet displayed a digital blueprint of the tower. She zoomed in clumsily on the elevator core. "You said buildings vibrate when something's wrong." He crouched beside her, keeping a respectful distance. "Sometimes. Is it wrong now?" Daniel hesitated. Children deserved honesty. But not fear. "It's unsettled," he said. "Like when you feel a storm coming before the clouds show up." She considered that. "Mom says storms can be controlled." A faint smile touched his mouth. "Some can." She finally looked at him. "You're not just maintenance, are you?" The question landed softly but precisely. Before he could respond, heels struck marble behind them. Vivian's voice cut through the quiet. "Lily." The girl scrambled to her feet. "We were just. I know what you were just doing." Vivian's gaze shifted to Daniel, cool, measured. "Mr. Mercer, I would appreciate you not encouraging imaginative fears." "I wasn't," he replied calmly. "She needs stability, not speculation." Lily frowned. "He doesn't speculate. He listens." Vivian exhaled, tension threading her posture. "Sweetheart, wait by the elevator." When the child stepped away, Vivian lowered her voice. "You've already been advised about overstepping." "Yes, ma'am. And yet you're discussing infrastructure concerns with my daughter." "I was answering a question." Her jaw tightened. You're on probation, Mr. Mercer. One more incident and we'll have to reevaluate your position. He absorbed it without flinch. My position, he said evenly, is to maintain structural integrity. That's handled by engineers. He met her eyes, steady, unthreatening. Yes. Silence stretched between them, thick as the glass walls surrounding the lobby. She turned first. Focus on what you're hired to do, she repeated. The elevator doors slid shut with Lily inside. The reflective steel briefly captured Daniel's image, uniform creased, hands calloused, expression unreadable. When they were gone, the lobby seemed larger, colder. A security guard approached hesitantly. You really think something's wrong? Daniel didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked to the guard's console and tapped lightly on the desk. Has anyone else accessed the service node on level B3 tonight? The guard blinked. That node's obsolete. Exactly. He leaned closer to the monitor, eyes scanning access logs. There, a flicker, a credential ping that shouldn't exist. Did you see that? The guard whispered. Daniel nodded once. Someone's testing response times for what? He didn't say. Upstairs, champagne corks popped faintly through the ventilation ducts. The guard swallowed. Should we escalate? Daniel hesitated. Escalate and risk being dismissed again. Stay silent and risk something worse. He straightened. Document it. Timestamp everything. The guard nodded quickly. As Daniel turned away, his phone buzzed again. A message from Eli's babysitter. He's coughing tonight. Used the inhaler twice, just letting you know. Daniel's chest tightened. He stepped outside through the revolving doors for a breath of night air. The city hummed below the tower, headlights streaming like veins of light. He rested his hands on the cool metal railing. Probation, health insurance, medication. He could stay quiet. He could keep his head down. But the latency spikes were tightening, the pattern sharpening. Inside, the security guard was replaying footage. It's like someone's learning the building, he muttered. Daniel returned to the console, jaw set. Keep watching the service feeds, he instructed quietly. If the pattern accelerates, call me immediately. You're off in 20 minutes. I know. He stepped back toward the elevators, the polished marble reflecting ceiling lights like fractured stars. Before the doors opened, he glanced at the camera mounted above. Someone was watching. He felt it. If you've ever been underestimated because of a uniform or a job title, subscribe with the bell on. Stories like this aren't about titles, they're about truth surfacing when it matters most. The elevator arrived with a soft chime. As he stepped inside, the faint vibration rippled through the floor again, stronger this time. Somewhere deep beneath the tower, code adjusted itself. Learning. And Daniel knew with quiet certainty, the storm wasn't coming. It was already here. The elevator hummed upward, smooth and expensive, insulated from the tremor only he seemed to feel. Daniel watched the floor numbers glow one by one, faint reflections of his own face flickering in brushed steel. 40. The doors opened into controlled brightness and curated power. Investor banners lined the corridor. Assistants moved quickly in tailored black. The scent of catered seafood and polished wood drifted through the air. Everything above the 30th floor felt insulated from consequence. He stepped out just as Marcus Vance rounded the corner. The COO's smile was polished for donors, not maintenance staff. Mr. Mercer, Marcus said, voice light but edged. Funny seeing you up here without a mop. Daniel held his tablet at his side. Routine vibration review. Marcus's eyes flicked to the screen. You really can't let this go, can you? Sir, the latency spikes are increasing. Marcus leaned closer, lowering his voice though no one had asked him to. You're on probation because you don't understand boundaries. Daniel didn't move. You filed 3 anomaly reports in 10 days, Marcus continued. Your facilities, not cybersecurity. Not systems engineering, facilities. The systems overlap, Daniel said quietly. Marcus laughed once, sharp and dismissive. That's adorable. Across the glass wall, investors toured the Executive Operations Center, admiring the real-time dashboards projected on towering LED screens. Vivienne stood at the center of them, confident, explaining how the AI grid monitored every door, every elevator, every biometric point in perfect synchronization. Fully autonomous, she was saying. Zero vulnerability. Daniel's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Marcus followed his gaze. See that? That's what expertise looks like. A server passed between them carrying champagne flutes. Marcus lifted one, offering it mockingly. You want to toast to your imaginary storm? Daniel didn't take it. The pattern isn't imaginary, he said evenly. It's accelerating. Marcus's smile faded a fraction. Enough. He stepped closer, voice dropping. You will not embarrass this company in front of investors with your paranoia. If I hear one more whisper of you implying structural instability, I will personally recommend termination. The word hung in the air. Termination. Daniel's pulse remained steady, but somewhere beneath the calm, calculation shifted. Understood, he replied. Marcus gave a satisfied nod and turned away, already smoothing his expression for the room of executives beyond the glass. Daniel remained where he was for a moment, watching the operations wall. Streams of green indicators flowed in perfect harmony. Elevators aligned, doors synchronized. Cameras scanned in unison. It looked flawless, too flawless. A small flicker pulsed across one corner of the display, barely visible before smoothing itself out. His tablet vibrated in his hand. Level B3 service node, access ping. Unauthorized credential attempt. Again. His thumb hovered over the escalation protocol. If he flagged it now, Marcus would shut him down publicly. Probation would convert to dismissal before sunrise. Eli's medication, rent, everything balanced on that thin line. Behind the glass, Lily stood beside her mother, watching the display with wide eyes. She caught sight of him through the reflection. Her gaze sharpened. Vivienne continued speaking, unaware of the flicker in the corner of her system. Daniel exhaled slowly and stepped toward the glass wall. An assistant intercepted him. You can't enter this area without clearance. I need 30 seconds with the CEO, not possible. Behind them, Marcus noticed and strode over. What part of boundaries didn't you understand? He said quietly. Daniel held up his tablet, screen glowing with the time-stamped anomaly. It's not stopping. Marcus glanced once, dismissive. That's background noise. It's mapping response times. Marcus's patience snapped. Security. 2 guards approached. Uncomfortable, but obedient. Escort Mr. Mercer to his designated zone, Marcus instructed. He's disrupting operations. Daniel didn't resist. As they guided him down the corridor, he heard Vivienne's voice rise in polished confidence. Complete system integration, she declared, unbreachable. The elevator doors slid shut on Daniel and the guards. Inside the metal box, silence pressed close. One of the guards shifted awkwardly. You really think something's coming? Daniel stared at the glowing floor numbers descending. Yes, the building vibrated again, stronger now. Not enough for the guards to notice. Enough for him. The doors opened to the mid-level operations hallway. The guards stepped back. Stay here, one muttered apologetically. Daniel walked toward the maintenance corridor, heart steady, mind racing. They thought the system was sealed. They thought power insulated them. But deep in the service layers beneath polished marble and executive certainty, something was learning the tower's rhythm. And it was almost finished. Daniel pushed through the heavy maintenance door and let it shut behind him with a muted clang. The hum of machinery wrapped around him instantly, cool air circulating through steel lungs, water pumps cycling in steady rhythm. Down here, the building felt honest. No marble, no champagne, just structure. He moved quickly toward the substation console and woke the diagnostic interface. Lines of code scrolled like rain across dark glass. The unauthorized pings were no longer subtle. They were probing, testing lock responses, measuring elevator synchronization delays, mapping failover redundancies. He inhaled slowly. "They're measuring load tolerance," he muttered to himself. Above him, faint applause echoed through the ventilation ducts. Investor rehearsal. Demonstrations. Speeches about innovation. The console flashed again. Level 40 executive floor, micro delays 0.8 seconds. Then 1.1. Then gone, not random, incremental. He tapped into the legacy service node, the one considered obsolete. It wasn't connected to the main AI grid in the same way. It ran parallel infrastructure, older code, harder to access. And someone was inside it. His jaw tightened. He opened a secure trace window and followed the handshake pattern. The intrusion wasn't brute force. It was elegant, adaptive. It would trigger no alarms until it wanted to. Daniel reached for the internal phone mounted on the concrete wall. His fingers hovered over the extension for executive operations. Probation. Termination. He lowered the receiver. Another vibration rippled through the floor, stronger now, almost imperceptibly shifting the rhythm of the pumps. Upstairs, Vivienne stood before a semicircle of investors, gesturing toward the massive operations display. Marcus stood nearby, radiating confidence. "Our AI grid anticipates threats before they manifest," she said. "Redundancies across every floor." An investor nodded approvingly. "So there's no single point of failure?" "None," she replied without hesitation. At that exact moment, Daniel watched the service node display flicker. A single point pulsed red. Level 40. He froze. Then the lights dimmed for half a heartbeat. In the executive corridor, conversation faltered. Emergency systems recalibrated instantly, smooth, controlled. The display screen stabilized. Marcus forced a laugh. Routine recalibration. Vivienne's posture remained steady, but a crease appeared between her brows. Back in the service level, Daniel's tablet vibrated violently, multiple simultaneous pings. Elevator core, biometric locks, fire suppression grid. "They're synchronizing," he breathed. He moved fast now, fingers flying across the legacy interface, attempting to isolate the intrusion before it reached threshold. But the attack was patient. It wasn't breaching, it was learning. A loud chime echoed through the tower. Above, elevator doors froze mid-shaft. Conversation stopped. The operations wall flickered green to amber. Marcus's voice sharpened. "What's happening?" Technicians rushed to consoles, typing frantically. System latency spike, unexpected override conflict. Vivienne stepped closer to the screen. "Resolve it. We're trying." Daniel watched the amber indicators cascade across his smaller console like falling dominoes. "They're triggering manual override conflict loops," he whispered. The building shuddered again, barely, but enough. On level 40, Lily stood near the panoramic window, staring at the skyline. The lights flickered overhead. She frowned. "Mom?" The biometric doors along the executive wing clicked in unison. Locked. Downstairs, Daniel's phone buzzed. Security feed, executive floor lockdown initiated. Unauthorized command origin unknown. His pulse quickened, not from fear, but from calculation. They waited for peak occupancy, he realized. In the operations center, alarms began to pulse softly, not screaming, but insistent. Marcus barked orders. "Override the grid." "We can't," a technician replied. The systems rejecting executive credentials, Vivienne's voice remained controlled. Use manual command. Manual's not responding. The amber lights shifted to red. Emergency protocol initiated. On Daniel's console, the service note glowed like a heartbeat. He grabbed the internal phone again. This time, he didn't hesitate. Executive Operations, he said when someone answered. This is Facilities. You have a breach in the legacy service architecture. If you don't reroute control to B3 maintenance, you'll lose level 40 completely. There was a pause. Then Marcus's voice cut in, tight with strain. You are not authorized to advise during a live event. You don't have full visibility, Daniel replied evenly. They're inside your redundancies. A distant metallic clang echoed through the ductwork. Upstairs, Lily tried the door handle. It didn't move. Mom? Vivienne turned, composure cracking for the first time as she saw the sealed corridor lights flashing red. A technician's voice trembled. We can't unlock level 40. Silence fell like glass shattering. Down in the service corridor, Daniel listened to the building's altered rhythm. The storm had finished learning. And now, it had begun. Red indicators flooded the executive operations wall in violent succession. Elevator icons blinked frozen between floors. Biometric access points locked in hard sequence. The soft, insistent alarm shifted into a sharp, pulsing tone that cut through conversation like a blade. Vivienne stood perfectly still. Unlock the executive corridor, she ordered. A technician swallowed, the systems rejecting all high-level credentials. Marcus slammed his palm against the console. Override it, we're trying. On level 40, the panoramic windows reflected flashing red light across Lily's small figure. She tugged at the door again, confused now. The hallway behind her had sealed in both directions. Magnetic locks fused into place. Mom, her voice echoed thinly through reinforced glass. Down in the maintenance level, Daniel didn't wait for permission this time. He was already moving. The building's vibration had shifted from probing to seizure. Latency spikes surged in synchronized bursts, exactly what he'd feared. Someone had mapped response times, then forced conflict loops between AI command layers. He spoke into the internal line again. You're in a cascade. If the grid keeps fighting itself, it'll isolate floor clusters. Level 40 is first. Marcus's voice came back strained. This is a cybersecurity issue. Stay in your lane. It's not just cyber, Daniel said. They're using the service node as a bridge. Your redundancy is amplifying the breach. There was a pause, longer this time. Behind Marcus's breathing, Daniel heard something else. Fear. On the executive floor, Vivienne tried her access card again. The reader flashed red. Her composure cracked by a fraction. Lily, she called, forcing calm into her voice. Stay where you are. The child nodded, though confusion clouded her eyes. In the operations center, a consultant dialed frantically into remote support lines. They're spoofing our AI authority chain, he muttered. It thinks we're the intruders. Daniel reached the B3 maintenance console and pulled up the legacy grid architecture. Unlike the AI layer, it was manual, raw logic pathways, older but isolated. The intrusion wasn't trying to shut down the building, it was testing executive paralysis. He spoke clearly into the phone. If you reroute operational authority to maintenance command, I can sever the feedback loop. Marcus scoffed, but it lacked conviction. You? Reroute executive authority? You don't have time. On the operations wall, another floor indicator turned red. A technician gasped. It's spreading. Vivienne's control fractured at the edges. Do whatever stops it. Marcus hesitated only a second longer. Grant Facilities temporary B3 command access, he barked. An assistant's fingers flew over keys. Access granted. Daniel's console shifted, authority tokens unlocking pathways long sealed. He moved without flourish, hands steady, isolating the service node from the AI grid's recursive loop. He redirected command queries through the manual backbone, starving the intrusion of adaptive feedback. Sweat beaded at his temple, but his breathing stayed even. Upstairs, Lily pressed her hand to the glass. "Mom, the lights are weird." "I know," Vivienne whispered, pressing her own hand against the opposite side of the barrier. On Daniel's screen, the breach flared angrily, attempting to reassert control through elevator synchronization. He cut elevator core feedback and rerouted it through mechanical fallback. In the shaft, stalled cars jerked slightly, then stabilized. Gasps rippled through the operations room. What did he just do? A technician whispered. He isolated the elevator logic, another answered, stunned. Marcus stared at the console feed now labeled B3 manual command active. "How does maintenance know how to do this?" No one answered. Daniel's voice returned through the speaker. "You have a window. 3 minutes before it recalibrates." Vivienne didn't care how it looked anymore. "Unlock level 40. "I can't unlock it directly," Daniel replied. "The breach is piggybacking on biometric loops. I need physical override access from the service corridor adjacent to that floor." Marcus's head snapped toward the maintenance schematics. "There's no access point." "There is," Daniel said quietly. "You just don't use it." Silence. Vivienne turned to Marcus. "Take him there." Marcus hesitated, pride warring with urgency. Vivienne's voice hardened. "Now, if you've ever seen someone underestimated step into the fire when others freeze, subscribe with the bell on. Moments like this reveal who really understands the ground beneath their feet." Down in B3, Daniel grabbed his worn tool bag. The gloves slid over his hands like second nature. The building trembled again, less violently now, but unstable. He stepped into the freight elevator with Marcus and 2 security guards. No one spoke as the car ascended. The air felt heavier inside the metal box. Marcus finally broke the silence. "If this fails, it won't," Daniel replied. Not arrogance. Certainty. The elevator slowed near level 39 and halted with a mechanical sigh. Above them, Lily waited behind sealed doors, and the man they'd ignored for months was the only one who knew how to reach her. The freight elevator doors groaned open onto level 39. The polished executive finish ended abruptly at a narrow service corridor, unfinished concrete, exposed conduit lines, emergency strip lighting casting everything in sterile white. Marcus stepped out first, clearly out of place in his tailored suit. "There's no access to 40 from here," he said sharply. "There is," Daniel replied, already moving. The building vibrated again, a low metallic shudder that traveled through the soles of their shoes. Overhead, a ventilation fan stuttered before stabilizing. The breach was adapting. He knelt beside a recessed panel most executives had never seen. No signage, no chrome finish. Just a flush seam against painted cinder block. "Here," he said. Marcus frowned. "That's just utility wiring." Daniel didn't answer. He unscrewed the plate with quick, precise turns. Behind it, a narrow crawl channel revealed bundled control lines feeding level 40's biometric locks, legacy wiring designed as mechanical redundancy before full AI integration. "They left the old backbone in place," he murmured. "They always do." He slipped a compact diagnostic tool from his bag and clipped into the control junction. The tablet screen flickered as he bypassed the AI authority chain and accessed direct relay control. Upstairs, Lily paced near the sealed corridor doors, red lights reflecting in her wide eyes. Vivienne stood outside the barrier, hand still pressed to glass. "Mom, why won't it open?" "It will," she promised, though uncertainty trembled beneath her calm. Back in the service corridor, Marcus watched Daniel's hands move with unsettling confidence. How do you even know this exists? Daniel didn't look up. I've seen systems built like this before. That doesn't answer the question. It's enough. He isolated the biometric loop feeding the executive corridor and rerouted its power draw through the legacy circuit. The breach fought back immediately, injecting false authorization requests to reassert dominance. Daniel anticipated it. They're trying to overwhelm the fallback, he said quietly. Marcus swallowed. Can you stop it? I can slow it. He adjusted the relay timing, forcing the intrusion into a lag pattern it hadn't mapped yet. The red indicators on Marcus's tablet flickered amber for half a second. Now, Daniel said, have them attempt manual unlock from your console. Marcus spoke into his headset, voice tight. Attempt unlock on level 40 corridor. Upstairs, a technician executed the command. The biometric panel beside Vivienne's hand blinked once, then again. The magnetic locks groaned, but didn't release. It's resisting, Marcus reported. Daniel's jaw tightened, because it's still reading you as conflict. He shifted strategies, pulling elevator synchronization entirely off the AI grid and onto mechanical relay. The freight elevator behind them hummed differently now, less smooth, more raw. In the shaft, stalled executive cars jerked slightly, then aligned. In the operations center, technicians stared at the screen. He's rewriting load logic manually. How does facilities know load logic? No one answered. Sweat trickled down Daniel's temple. He wiped it with his sleeve without breaking rhythm. Try again, he said. Marcus relayed the command. Upstairs, the lock emitted a sharp click. One of the magnets disengaged. Vivienne's breath caught. But the door remained sealed by a secondary deadbolt tied to the intrusion. Daniel closed his eyes for half a second, not in frustration, but calculation. They're using your executive authentication as a trigger, he realized. Every time you request override, it flags as hostile and reinforces the seal. Marcus stared at him. Then what do we do? Daniel met his gaze for the first time since stepping off the elevator. Stop acting like you own it, silence. He disabled executive override tokens entirely and replaced them with a neutral maintenance credential, low priority, invisible to the breach's threat hierarchy. Now, he said softly, unlock as maintenance. Marcus hesitated. Pride warred with logic. Vivienne's voice crackled through the headset, stripped of corporate polish. Do it. Marcus relayed the new command. Upstairs, the biometric panel flashed green. Both magnetic locks disengaged with a heavy metallic thud. The executive corridor doors swung inward. Lily stumbled forward into her mother's arms. A collective exhale rippled through the operations center. Down in the service corridor, Daniel remained crouched by the open panel, eyes still scanning the intrusion map. It's not over, he said quietly. Marcus looked at him differently now, less dismissive, more unsettled. You just bypassed the entire executive authority structure. No, Daniel corrected. I bypassed its ego. The building's vibration eased slightly, but the service node still pulsed red. They'll try again, he added. This was phase 1. Marcus's voice dropped. Who are you? Daniel secured the panel and rose to his feet. Maintenance, he said. But even as he spoke, the question lingered in the stale concrete air. Because what he'd just done wasn't maintenance at all. Marcus stared at him as if seeing him for the first time. Above them, the executive corridor erupted in overlapping voices. Relief, disbelief, controlled panic. Through Marcus's headset came Vivienne's unsteady breath as she held her daughter. She's safe, someone confirmed. Daniel didn't allow himself to linger in the relief. His eyes were already back on the tablet. They're regrouping, he said. The service node pulsed again, quieter but more focused. The intrusion had lost access to the executive corridor, but was now compressing its efforts toward the building's core grid. "What does that mean?" Marcus demanded. "It means this wasn't about trapping one floor," Daniel replied. "It was about mapping your response speed." Marcus went pale. "Mapping for what?" Daniel stood and moved toward the freight elevator again, for something bigger. The elevator doors slid shut, carrying them upward to the executive operations level. The ride felt heavier now, mechanical relays humming differently under manual routing. Marcus adjusted his cufflinks reflexively, as if restoring external order might stabilize internal chaos. When the doors opened, the atmosphere on the executive floor had changed. Champagne glasses sat abandoned on polished tables. Investors clustered near the windows, murmuring in tight circles. Technicians hovered over consoles, eyes wide with something dangerously close to awe. Vivienne stood near the operations wall, Lily wrapped tightly in her arms. Her composure was intact again, but thinner. She looked up as Daniel stepped forward. "You stabilized it," she said, voice low. "Temporarily," he replied. Marcus cleared his throat. "He claims this was Phase 1. Daniel walked to the main operations console. No one stopped him this time. The massive lead wall displayed the building's digital nervous system, green, amber, and a faint flicker of red deep in the lower quadrants. "They weren't trying to destroy it," Daniel explained. "They were studying it. Every override attempt you made fed them data." A consultant bristled. "That's speculation." Daniel tapped the screen, isolating a pattern of escalating latency spikes. "It's adaptive learning. Someone built this intrusion to evolve." Silence settled over the room. Vivienne's eyes narrowed. "Can it be stopped?" "Yes," Daniel answered. "But not from here." He redirected the display feed to the legacy architecture map, the old backbone most executives had never seen. "This grid," he said, "was layered over an existing mechanical system. You automated authority. But you never removed the manual core." A technician whispered, "We didn't need to." Daniel looked at him calmly. "You always need to." Marcus crossed his arms. "So what's your plan?" Daniel's fingers moved across the console with steady precision. "We isolate the AI from external inputs entirely, force it into a closed-loop mode. Then we migrate critical functions to manual relay temporarily." "That would shut down half the executive features," the consultant protested. "It will keep your building from being owned," Daniel replied. Vivienne studied him carefully. "How do you know this?" For a brief moment, the room felt suspended, like the building itself was waiting. Daniel didn't answer directly. Instead, he accessed the intrusion's code signature and projected it onto the screen. The pattern resembled something older, military-grade penetration architecture designed not for theft, but strategic paralysis. He recognized it immediately. "Because I've seen this before," he said quietly. Marcus stepped closer. "Where?" Daniel's gaze remained on the code. Somewhere it mattered more than investors. A ripple of unease passed through the executives. The intrusion spiked suddenly, red indicators flashing across lower service levels. "They're attempting control escalation," a technician cried. Daniel moved fast. "Kill executive remote access entirely," he instructed. "But—" "Do it." Vivienne didn't hesitate. "Shut it down," remote feeds cut instantly. The building's hum shifted again, less polished, more raw. Daniel rerouted power distribution manually through the legacy grid, starving the intrusion of adaptive feedback. The lead wall flickered violently, then stabilized into a calmer configuration. Red faded to amber, amber to green. A collective breath filled the room. "It's contained," a technician whispered. "For now," Daniel corrected. He stepped back from the console, sweat cooling on his skin. Investors were staring at him openly now. The maintenance uniform no longer fit the silhouette they were seeing. Vivienne approached slowly, Lily still holding her hand. "You said this was Phase 1, she said. Daniel nodded once. It was a test. For what? His eyes met hers evenly. For whether you deserve to keep control. The words hung in the air, not accusation, not arrogance, just truth. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. Who built something like this? Daniel glanced at the intrusion signature again, a memory surfacing from another time, another uniform. Someone who knows exactly how your system thinks, he said, and in that moment, the quiet maintenance workers standing beneath the towering operations wall no longer looked like staff. He looked like the only one in the room who had ever designed a battlefield. Silence pressed in from all sides of the Executive Operations Center. The lead wall glowed steady green now, but no one trusted it the way they had an hour ago. Investors who had arrived to admire innovation were now watching a maintenance technician stand where senior engineers had frozen. Vivienne released Lily's hand slowly and stepped closer to him. "You're saying this was strategic," she said. "Not random." "Yes," he replied. "It probed your hierarchy. It studied how fast you panic, how fast you override, how much you rely on automation." Marcus crossed his arms, though the gesture lacked its earlier arrogance. "And how do you know that?" Daniel reached into his tool bag and pulled out his tablet. He connected it to the main display without asking permission. No one stopped him. A new layer of data appeared over the building schematic, patterns within patterns. Response times graphed against executive commands, latency spikes correlating precisely with high-level override attempts. "They weren't attacking your walls," he said calmly. "They were training against your leadership behavior." A murmur spread across the room. One investor leaned forward. Training for what? Daniel zoomed the projection inward, isolating a deeper anomaly embedded in the service node. For a takeover, he answered. Not physical. Operational. Marcus's jaw tightened. That speculation, Daniel tapped again. A code signature expanded, structured, disciplined, almost elegant in its intrusion logic. "I helped design countermeasures against this architecture," he said quietly. The room stilled. Vivienne's eyes sharpened. "You what?" He didn't dramatize it. Years ago, the consultant stepped closer to the screen, squinting. "This pattern, it's military-grade adaptive infiltration." Daniel nodded once. Marcus let out a short breath. "You expect us to believe facilities built military defense systems?" Daniel met his gaze without hostility. "No, I expect you to read the data." On the screen, he overlaid a historical code pattern, one he had memorized long ago. The symmetry between the two was undeniable. A technician whispered, "It's the same backbone logic." Vivienne's composure shifted, not broken, but recalibrated. "Explain," she said. He hesitated for only a second. "I served as a systems engineer for military intelligence," he said evenly. "We designed infrastructure grids that could survive coordinated cyber-physical breaches, and we designed tools that could simulate them." A heavy silence settled over the polished floor. Marcus stared at him. "You were military intelligence, yes, and now you fix light fixtures?" "I fix what's in front of me." The answer wasn't defensive. It was matter of fact. Vivienne's voice softened slightly. "Why didn't you say anything?" Daniel glanced briefly toward Lily, who was listening with wide eyes. "You didn't ask." The truth landed harder than accusation. The consultant shook his head slowly. "If this is what I think it is, someone's using adaptive military penetration logic against a private corporation." Daniel nodded. "And you gave it a live rehearsal." Marcus looked suddenly ill. "The investor demo, yes." Vivienne's gaze drifted to the panoramic windows, the city glittering beyond. For the first time since the crisis began, she looked small against the skyline. "What do we do now?" she asked quietly. Daniel inhaled slowly. "You hard separate the AI from external command pathways permanently. You rebuild your authority structure without ego-based priority weighting. And you audit every executive level override." Marcus bristled faintly at that, but said nothing. "And the people who built this?" Vivienne pressed. "They'll try again," Daniel replied, "but next time they won't be mapping. They'll be executing." A tremor of unease rippled through the investors. If you've ever seen truth surface in a room that wasn't built to hear it, subscribe with the bell on, because sometimes the quietest voice in the room carries the heaviest experience. Vivienne turned back to him fully now. "Why stay here?" she asked. "Why maintenance?" He didn't answer immediately. The lead wall hummed softly behind him, stabilized under manual relay. "My son needs stable health care," he said at last, "and this job had an opening." No self-pity, no embellishment, just fact. Marcus looked down at his polished shoes, then back at the man in steel-toed boots who had just saved the company from humiliation. The power dynamic in the room had shifted so completely it was almost visible. Vivienne extended her hand, not as CEO, but as someone reassessing her assumptions. "You should have been in that boardroom months ago," she said. Daniel didn't take the hand yet. "We're not finished," he replied. The breach is contained, not erased. The lead wall flickered faintly, as if to prove his point, and this time every eye in the room turned to him first. The lead wall flickered again, subtle but deliberate. Daniel's gaze snapped upward. The containment he'd forced into place was holding, but something new threaded through the lower grid. A delayed execution script, dormant until triggered. "They left a tail," he said quietly. Marcus stiffened. "I thought you said it was contained." "It is," Daniel replied. "Contained doesn't mean clean." He stepped closer to the console, fingers moving with renewed urgency. The script was nested deep inside the AI's predictive engine, disguised as a diagnostic subroutine. If it activated, it wouldn't lock doors this time. It would corrupt command authentication permanently. Vivienne moved to his side. "What does it do?" "It rewrites authority weights," he said. "Gradually. You wouldn't notice until you weren't in control anymore." A cold silence swept through the room. One of the investors whispered, "Corporate hijack." Daniel nodded once. "Exactly." Marcus rubbed a hand over his face. "Can you remove it?" "Yes," Daniel answered. "But not from here." He disconnected from the executive console and motioned toward the service access corridor. "I need physical proximity to the AI core's manual relay hub. If the script detects remote deletion, it'll replicate." The consultant blinked. "You're saying it's self-preserving?" "I'm saying whoever wrote it expected resistance." Vivienne didn't hesitate this time. "Take him." They moved quickly, Daniel in front now, Marcus and two senior engineers behind him. The executive hallway that had once been his barrier was now a path cleared without question. They entered a restricted mechanical chamber behind the operations wall, a space few executives had ever seen. The air was warmer here, heavy with ozone and the faint metallic scent of heated circuits. Rows of hardware racks blinked steadily. Daniel crouched at the base of the primary relay stack and removed a lower panel, revealing the legacy interface port that paralleled the AI's core. "This is where ego lives," he murmured. Marcus frowned. "Excuse me?" "You weighted executive command's highest priority," Daniel said. "The script hides beneath that assumption." He connected his tablet directly into the relay hub. The screen flared with cascading code, far denser than what had appeared on the polished lead wall outside. The malicious script shimmered like a shadow woven into structure. Daniel began dissecting it line by line. Upstairs, investors waited in uneasy silence. Word had already begun spreading. Maintenance had stabilized a system their consultants couldn't. In the mechanical chamber, sweat slid down Daniel's spine beneath his uniform. The hardware emitted a low, constant hum that vibrated through his fingertips as he typed. The script attempted to fork. He anticipated it. Redirecting to dead loop, he muttered. Marcus leaned closer. "How do you move that fast?" Daniel didn't look up, because hesitation is what it wants. The script flared again, one last attempt to anchor itself into the authority matrix. Daniel severed the executive-weighted authentication hierarchy entirely. On the lead wall outside, the hierarchy map collapsed and rebalanced equal priority tiers across all command pathways. A technician's voice crackled through Marcus's headset. Authority weighting reset. Executive override is no longer top tier. Marcus went rigid. "You removed our primary control?" Daniel glanced at him calmly. "I removed the vulnerability." On his screen, the malicious code began to unravel, stripped of the bias it depended on. He executed the final purge. For a long second, nothing happened. Then the relay hub lights shifted from amber to a steady, unwavering green. In the operations center, a collective breath released. "It's gone," a technician confirmed. Daniel sat back slightly on his heels, tension draining from his shoulders for the first time since the breach began. Marcus stared at the stabilized display. "You rewrote the building's command structure." "Yes, and you did it from a maintenance panel." Daniel slid his tablet free and replaced the relay cover carefully. "Power shouldn't depend on titles," he said quietly. "Systems work better when they don't assume superiority." Vivienne entered the chamber, Lily trailing cautiously behind her. The little girl looked at the blinking racks with wide curiosity. "Is it safe now?" Daniel met her eyes. Yes, Vivienne studied the equalized authority map displayed on a nearby monitor. No executive tier, no priority bias. "You just flattened my control hierarchy," she said. He stood slowly. "I stabilized it." Silence lingered between them, not hostile, but transformative. Outside the chamber, the city skyline glowed as if nothing had happened. Inside, something fundamental had shifted. The CEO, who once walked past him without seeing now, stood in a mechanical room smelling of circuitry and sweat, looking at the quiet single father who had just dismantled her company's greatest vulnerability. And for the first time, her power wasn't unquestioned. It was earned. The mechanical chamber felt smaller now, as if the air itself understood something irreversible had happened. The steady green lights along the relay racks cast a muted glow across faces that had once radiated certainty. Vivienne stepped closer to him, her heels clicking softly against the concrete floor, no longer echoing dominance, but intention. "You said you helped design countermeasures against this architecture," she said. "I need you to be clear." Daniel wiped his hands slowly on the cloth he carried in his back pocket. The fabric was worn thin at the edges, stained from years of work no one noticed. "I was part of a systems engineering unit," he said evenly. "Military intelligence. We built infrastructure grids for overseas command centers. We also built simulations to test whether leadership structures could withstand adaptive intrusion." Marcus let out a disbelieving breath. "You designed the kind of attack we just experienced. I designed how to survive it," Daniel corrected. Lily's fingers tightened around her mother's hand. She looked at him differently now, not just as the man who fixed flickering lights, but as someone who had stood in darker rooms than this one. Vivienne studied him in silence. The polished CEO persona was gone. What remained was calculation and something more personal. Regret. "Why leave?" she asked. He hesitated, not because the answer was complicated, but because it was simple. "My wife passed 3 years ago," he said quietly. "Cancer. I needed something stable for my son, something predictable." The hum of the servers filled the pause. "I wasn't looking for prestige," he added. "I was looking for health care." The words struck harder than any accusation. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "You could have applied for a senior position." Daniel's mouth curved faintly, not quite a smile. "Would you have hired me?" No one answered. Outside the chamber, the operations center remained suspended in quiet disbelief. Investors who had arrived expecting polished assurances were now whispering about resilience, about unexpected expertise, about the maintenance technician who had outmaneuvered their cybersecurity consultants. Vivienne straightened slowly. "You've been filing reports for months, yes, and we ignored them, yes." There was no edge in his tone, just confirmation. She inhaled, steadying herself. Marcus, the COO, looked up. "Pull the anomaly reports Mr. Mercer submitted over the past quarter. Display them." Within seconds, the lead wall in the operations center lit up with archived maintenance logs, time-stamped, documented, precise. Latency spike observations, service node irregularities, predictive failure windows. Each one had been marked reviewed, no action required. A quiet murmur rippled through the room beyond the chamber. Daniel didn't gloat. He didn't need to. The evidence spoke in calm, methodical lines. Vivienne walked past him into the operations center, Lily beside her. Daniel followed a step behind, Marcus trailing. She faced the gathered executives and investors. "For months," she began, voice measured but stripped of polish, "we dismissed warnings because they came from the wrong uniform." The words hung heavy. "Our infrastructure held tonight not because of our executive strategy, but because a member of our facilities team understood its vulnerabilities better than we did." Every gaze turned to Daniel. Heat rose faintly under his collar, but his posture remained grounded. An investor cleared his throat. "Are you saying this company was nearly compromised due to internal arrogance?" Vivienne didn't flinch. "Yes," Marcus swallowed. "And the breach?" Another investor asked. "Is it fully neutralized?" Daniel stepped forward, not into spotlight, but into responsibility. "The script is purged," he said. "But whoever built it knows your architecture now. You'll need structural reform, not cosmetic patches." The consultant nodded reluctantly. "He's right." Vivienne looked at Daniel again, and something shifted permanently in her expression, recognition. "You didn't step in to prove a point," she said quietly. "You stepped in because my daughter was upstairs, yes, and because this building holds your livelihood, yes." The simplicity of his answers carried more weight than speeches ever could. Marcus exhaled slowly. "You saved this company." Daniel shook his head. "I prevented it from embarrassing itself." A faint ripple of restrained laughter moved through the room, nervous, humbled. Vivienne stepped closer until only a few feet separated them. "Effective immediately," she said, voice steady and audible to everyone present, "Daniel will lead a full audit and restructuring of our infrastructure command hierarchy." A stunned silence followed. Marcus blinked. "Lead?" "Yes," she replied without looking at him. "Lead." Daniel held her gaze for a long moment. "This isn't about promotion," he said. "It's about correction." "Then correct us," she answered. And in that glass tower where he had once been told to focus on what he was hired to do, the quiet single father stood before executives, investors, and the CEO who had ignored him. Not as maintenance, but as the only architect in the room who had ever built something meant to survive war. The silence that followed wasn't disbelief anymore. It was reckoning. Marcus shifted his weight, eyes moving from the lead wall to the investors, then back to Daniel. For months, he had spoken to him with the casual authority reserved for someone invisible. Now, that same man stood at the center of a room full of executives who suddenly understood how close they had come to humiliation. Vivienne broke the silence first. "Marcus," she said evenly, "how many of his reports did you personally review?" The COO hesitated. "I delegated them." "To whom?" He glanced toward the cybersecurity consultant, who stiffened. They were categorized as low-risk anomalies. Daniel remained still. He didn't fold his arms, didn't look away. He simply stood, present. Vivienne's gaze hardened, not toward Daniel, but toward her own leadership team. "Low risk," she repeated quietly. She walked toward the operations console and tapped the display, bringing up the archived anomaly logs again. The timestamps lined up perfectly with the escalation pattern that had almost overtaken them. "You see this?" she said to the room. "This is what we ignored." Marcus tried to regain footing. No one anticipated a military-grade adaptive breach. Daniel spoke before he could stop himself. "I did." The room stilled. Marcus turned toward him, jaw tight. "And you didn't escalate it properly." "I did." Daniel replied calmly. 3 times. A technician swallowed. "He did." Marcus opened his mouth, then closed it. Vivienne faced him fully now. "You threatened termination. It wasn't a question." Marcus's composure finally cracked. He was stepping outside his role, "and you were protecting yours," she said. The words landed like a gavel. Across the room, investors exchanged glances. The hierarchy had shifted so completely it was almost audible. Daniel felt the weight of it, not triumph, but something heavier. Accountability, the kind that reshapes institutions if handled correctly. Vivienne turned back to him. "I owe you an apology," she said. The CEO of a multi-billion-dollar corporation stood in front of staff, consultants, and investors and said it plainly. "I dismissed you because of your uniform," she continued, "because I assumed expertise follows title." Daniel's expression didn't change, but something inside him eased slightly. "My son's inhaler doesn't care about titles," he said quietly. "It cares about coverage." A faint murmur rippled through the room again, not laughter this time, but recognition. Vivienne nodded once. "Effective immediately, your probation is revoked." Marcus lowered his gaze. "And effective immediately," she added, "our escalation protocols will no longer filter by position. Any anomaly flagged by anyone receives review." Daniel inclined his head slightly. "That will help." Marcus cleared his throat, struggling to regain relevance. "What about external perception?" Investors. An older investor raised a hand. "External perception improves when leadership admits error before catastrophe." The statement settled the room. Vivienne exhaled slowly, tension draining from her shoulders. "Daniel, I want you to brief the board tomorrow morning. Full transparency, no polish." He hesitated, not out of fear, but because this was never what he had sought. "I'll brief the vulnerabilities," he said, "and the reforms required. That's all I'm asking." Lily, who had been quiet through the exchange, stepped forward. She looked up at Daniel with open admiration. "I told you he listens," she said softly to her mother. Vivienne's lips curved faintly. "You did." Daniel met the girl's gaze. "And you did the brave thing." "By getting locked in?" she asked. "By trusting your instincts." The simplicity of the moment softened the tension that had filled the tower. Outside the panoramic windows, the city lights burned steadily, indifferent to corporate hierarchy shifts and humbled executives. Inside, the operations wall displayed the equalized authority grid, balanced, resilient, no longer vulnerable to ego-weighted control. Marcus approached Daniel one final time, his tone different now, less sharp, more measured. "I misjudged you," he said. Daniel regarded him calmly. You misjudged the system. Marcus absorbed that. Vivienne stepped beside them. This building doesn't just need stronger code, she said. It needs stronger judgment. She extended her hand again, not symbolic this time, but deliberate. Daniel looked at it for a brief moment, then he took it. The handshake wasn't applause-worthy. It wasn't dramatic. But in that glass tower where he had once been told to stay in his lane, it marked something unmistakable. Respect. And for the first time since he'd walked through those doors months ago in a maintenance uniform and steel-toed boots, his dignity wasn't something he carried quietly. It was something the room had witnessed. The operations center slowly began to breathe again. Technicians returned to their stations, but with a different posture, less automatic, more aware. Investors who had arrived for spectacle were now staying for substance. Conversation shifted from damage control to structural reform. Daniel stood near the lead wall a moment longer, studying the equalized authority grid he had forced into balance. Green indicators pulsed steadily across every floor. No executive waiting, no invisible hierarchy embedded in code, just structure. Vivienne stepped beside him, Lily leaning sleepily against her side. The board will want answers at 9, she said. They'll get them, he replied. And after that? He glanced toward the panoramic windows. Dawn was beginning to thin the darkness over the skyline. The city looked different at that hour, less polished, more honest. After that, he said, you'll need to rebuild your escalation culture. She studied him. And you? My shift ends at 6. The simplicity of the answer made her pause. You don't have to go back to maintenance, she said quietly. I meant what I said. Lead the audit. Oversee the rebuild. Marcus, standing a few steps away, nodded once in reluctant agreement. The board will approve it. Daniel considered the offer, not the prestige, not the office it would come with, but the stability, the health care, the predictability for Eli. I'll lead the restructure, he said. But on one condition, Vivienne raised an eyebrow. Which is, no more filtering by uniform. Not in code, not in culture. A faint smile touched her lips. Agreed. Lily looked up at him. Does that mean you won't fix the lobby lights anymore? He smiled softly. It means I'll fix bigger things. The girl seemed satisfied with that. Across the room, one of the investors approached. You saved this company from a very public collapse, he said. That won't go unnoticed. Daniel shook his head slightly. The system saved itself once we stopped letting ego steer it. The investor chuckled quietly, spoken like someone who's seen worse. Daniel didn't respond. He didn't need to. Vivienne turned toward the staff gathered in the operations center. Effective immediately, she announced, voice steady and carrying across the glass-walled space. Daniel will serve as Director of Infrastructure Integrity. All anomaly reports, regardless of source, will route directly to his office. A ripple of surprise moved through the room, followed by something stronger. Approval. Respect. Daniel felt it, not as applause, but as acknowledgement. He looked down at his hands, still faintly marked with grease. The uniform felt different now, not diminished, but transcended. The freight elevator chimed softly in the distance. His phone vibrated. A message from the babysitter, he's sleeping. Breathing steady now. Daniel exhaled slowly. Relief settled deeper than any corporate title ever could. Vivienne noticed the shift in his posture. Your son? Yes. She nodded once. Bring him by sometime. Lily could use a friend who listens. He glanced at Lily, who grinned in agreement. Maybe, he said. The first rays of morning sunlight cut across the operations wall, washing the equalized grid in pale gold. For months, power had walked past him in polished heels and tailored suits. It had dismissed him in elevators and warned him to stay in his lane. And yet when the building trembled, when authority failed and automation turned against itself, the quiet single father standing in steel-toed boots had been the only one who understood its heartbeat. Vivienne extended her hand once more, not out of obligation but partnership. This time, when he shook it, there was no imbalance, just two leaders standing on equal ground. The investors began to file out, murmuring about resilience and reform. Technicians recalibrated systems under new protocols. Marcus remained near the console, studying the authority map he once believed untouchable. Daniel picked up his worn tool bag. He wasn't leaving the building, he was changing it. And somewhere deep in the service layers beneath glass and steel, the structure hummed, not in warning now, but in alignment. The CEO who once ignored him had learned to listen. The daughter who whispered his name had bridged two worlds, and the single dad who stood where power never looked had proven something no title could grant. Real strength doesn't announce itself, it waits. If this story moved you, ask me for the next story title. Subscribe and don't miss our next story. They laughed when the single dad sat in first class until the pilot announced his name. Trust me, you'll feel it. And tell me in the comments, what injustice should we tackle next?
Nobody's moving. Nobody's doing anything. That was what the woman at Pump 4 said afterward, when the police asked her to describe what she saw. She'd been standing 6 feet away. She had a phone in her hand, and she just stood there. Everyone did, except him. By the way, where are you watching from? Tell me in the comments below. And if these stories mean something to you and you want to help us keep them ad-free and consistent, you can support us on Patreon. Link is in the description. Because what happened at that gas station on a Thursday afternoon wasn't supposed to involve a man in a blue uniform with oil on his knuckles. It wasn't supposed to be quiet. It wasn't supposed to be over in 11 seconds. But it was. And when the dust settled and the police arrived and the bystanders finally lowered their phones, only one question kept circulating through the crowd. Who is he? Not the suspect, not the boy, not the woman in the pressed blazer who was still shaking by the time the cruisers pulled in. The man who stopped it. That question, who is he, is what this story is really about. Because the answer changes everything. Declan Rourke had been awake since 4:45, not because Marisol was sick, not because a nightmare pulled him under, just because that's what his body did now. It had been doing it for 6 years, since the last deployment, since the kind of mornings where the difference between 4:45 and 5 o'clock was the difference between ready and caught off guard. The habit never left. Neither did the instinct. He made 2 sandwiches before 6. One for himself, one for Marisol, cut diagonally the way she liked, wrapped in foil so it stayed warm through her first class. And he packed her bag while she ate cereal at the kitchen table, half asleep, her dark hair pulled into a lopsided braid she'd done herself because she'd decided at age 8 that she was old enough to manage it. She mostly was. The drive to the station took 9 minutes. Marisol sat in the passenger seat of his truck with her backpack between her feet and her library book open on her knees, reading in the gray morning light without looking up. She was like that. Internally organized in a way that still surprised him, that quiet self-containment she'd inherited from her mother and somehow kept even after everything that had happened. He didn't talk much on the drive. He never did in the mornings. But when they pulled into the lot, he reached over and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear without thinking, and she let him, which meant she was in a good mood. "Break room's unlocked," he said. "Stay inside until Mrs. Ferreira comes at 7:30. "I know, Dad. I mean it. I know you mean it. You always mean it." She climbed out and headed for the side entrance without looking back, backpack bouncing, book already open again. He watched her until the door closed behind her. Then he turned to the forecourt. The station sat at the junction of Route 9 and the interstate on-ramp, which made it useful and busy and almost completely invisible. People stopped here because they had to, not because they wanted to. They filled their tanks, bought bad coffee, checked their mirrors, and pulled back onto the road without registering anything about the place except the price per gallon. It was the kind of location that existed in the margins of people's lives. Transactional, forgettable, staffed by people who were easy not to see. Declan had been working here for 14 months. He pulled on his uniform jacket, ran through the morning checklist: forecourt lights, squeegee buckets, pump 7, which had been sticking, and then took up his position near the service bay entrance. Not behind the counter. Never behind the counter if he could help it. He liked the open sight line, liked being able to see the full lot, both entry points, the road in both directions. Old habit. He noticed the van at 7:52. It came in from the interstate side, moved slowly through the lot without stopping at a pump, and pulled to the far edge near the air and water station. The engine stayed on. The driver didn't get out. The plates were from out of state, which wasn't unusual. The position of the vehicle was. Parked facing out. Engine running. Driver's window down 2 inches. Declan noted the plate number without reaching for his phone. He went back to checking pump 7, but he didn't stop watching. The van didn't move for 23 minutes. Declan knew because he'd been counting, not obsessively, not with any visible tension. Just the low-grade internal clock that had been running in the background of his life for so long, he barely noticed it anymore. 23 minutes at an air and water station with a running engine and a driver who hadn't stepped out once. No dog being watered. No tires being checked. No one in the passenger seat was waiting. Just a vehicle, idling, pointed at the exit. He refilled the squeegee buckets. But he helped a woman in a minivan locate the tire pressure gauge. He walked the pump 7's panel twice and found the stuck mechanism on the second try. A small piece of grit lodged in the release latch and cleared it with his thumbnail. Routine. Ordinary. The kind of morning that looked, from the outside, like nothing at all. At 8:17, the van pulled out. Declan watched it go. Note the direction. Back toward the interstate, not the town road. He held the plate number in his head for another few minutes, then let the morning absorb it. Could be nothing. Usually there was nothing. But the body keeps its own records, separate from the mind's conclusions, and somewhere underneath the ordinary rhythm of his shift, something had been filed away. He went in to check on Marisol at 8:30, and she was at the break room table with her homework spread out in front of her, pencil moving, library book face down beside her elbow. She'd eaten the second half of her sandwich. The foil was folded neatly at the corner of the table, which was something her mother used to do, and which Marisol did now without knowing why. "Mrs. Ferreira's late," she said without looking up. 5 minutes, he said. She texted. "She's always 5 minutes. Most people are." Marisol looked up at that, the way she did when she suspected he was saying something that meant more than it sounded. She had her mother's eyes, that particular quality of attention that made you feel you were being read rather than looked at. Then she went back to her homework, apparently deciding he wasn't being philosophical, just factual, and he stood in the doorway a moment longer than necessary. Then he heard a car pull in at pump 3, and he went back to work. Across the city, in a wood-paneled courtroom on the 4th floor of the Halverton County Courthouse, Judge Vivian Ashworth was 40 minutes into a custody modification hearing that should have taken 20. She sat straight-backed behind the bench, reading glasses low on her nose, the petition open in front of her. The petitioner was a man named Garrett Solis, 34 years old, 2 tours in the Marine Corps, currently employed as a warehouse supervisor. He was requesting a modification to his visitation schedule, citing changed circumstances following his ex-wife's relocation. His attorney had submitted documentation. His record was clean. His daughter, by all accounts in the file, adored him. said the PTSD disclosure was on page 11. Vivian had seen it before she'd seen almost anything else. She asked 2 clarifying questions, listened to both attorneys, reviewed the guardian ad litem's report, and ruled against the modification. Her reasoning was procedural, contained, airtight, instability of primary residence, insufficient documentation of the therapeutic support framework, the child's current adjustment to her environment. Every word was defensible. Every word was, in its own careful way, true. Garrett Solis nodded when she finished. Just nodded. Didn't argue, didn't react, just gathered himself with the particular composure of a man who had learned that some rooms don't respond to anything you say. That composure, Vivian noted privately, was actually a point in his favor. She noted it, and then she moved on to the next case. If you're finding this story as gripping as we do, hit subscribe and turn the bell on, because every week we bring you stories about the people the world forgot to look at. You won't want to miss what's coming. Her clerk, a young woman named Priya, who had been with her for 2 years and had learned exactly how much candor the judge would tolerate, caught her at the elevator after the session wrapped. "The Solis petition," Priya said carefully. His service record had 3 commendations. 2 of them were for... "I read the file, Priya." "Of course." The elevator arrived. Vivian stepped in. "He can reapply in 6 months with updated documentation," she said. "The framework is there. He simply hasn't met it." Priya didn't respond. The doors closed. Vivian checked her phone. She had a 4 o'clock dinner, a conference call at 2, and she needed to collect Owen from his after-school program by 5:30 at the latest. She pulled up her navigation app and found the fastest route. It took her past the gas station on Route 9. Owen Ashworth was 7 years old and had recently developed a passionate interest in anything with wheels. Vivian had learned this the hard way over the past 3 months, through detours to construction sites, through lengthy negotiations in toy aisles, through the specific exhaustion of explaining to an articulate and relentless child why they could not, in fact, stop and look at every truck they passed on the highway. He wasn't difficult. He was just intensely, completely alive in a way that Vivian sometimes found disorienting, as though the volume of his curiosity operated on a frequency her courtroom composure wasn't quite calibrated for. She picked him up at 5:28. He was waiting at the after-school entrance with his backpack on his front, which he did when he was excited about something, and his sneakers lighting up with each step, a concession she'd made in October that she was still mildly regretting. He climbed into the back seat and immediately began telling her about a classmate named Theo who had brought in a book about monster trucks and the specific load-bearing capacity of their tires. Vivian pulled into traffic. "That sounds educational," she said. "It was awesome," Owen corrected. She merged onto the main road and let him talk, giving the appropriate responses at the appropriate intervals, and her mind still partly in the courthouse. The Solis case had lodged somewhere behind her sternum in the way certain rulings occasionally did, not with doubt exactly, but with the particular weight of a decision that had been correct and uncomfortable in equal measure. She was practiced enough not to confuse discomfort with error. The law wasn't designed to feel good. It was designed to hold. The navigation prompted her to take the Route 9 exit. "Are we stopping?" Owen asked, tracking the turn with the radar all children seemed to have for any deviation from the direct path home. I need fuel." "Can I get a snack? You had a snack at school." "That was hours ago. It was 90 minutes ago." He accepted this with the philosophical resignation of a child who knew when he'd lost and moved on to pressing his face against the window to examine the gas station as they pulled in. It was the kind of place that held no particular interest for Vivian. Functional, slightly worn. The kind of establishment that existed to serve a purpose and asked nothing further of you. She pulled up to pump 3,